Fall in love with low prices, all in the Kroger app. Get fresh seasonal produce, lean, juicy meats, and all the best prices on all your grocery needs. We have deals on everything from fish in the seafood department to meat and cheese at the deli. Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away. Or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details. Fall in love with low prices, all in the Kroger app. Get fresh seasonal produce, lean, juicy meats, and all the best prices on all your grocery needs. We have deals on everything from fish in the seafood department to meat and cheese at the deli. Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away. Or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
They say there's no good news.
There's no good news.
Before we get into the reasons for why we're here today, I would just like to issue this disclaimer that thoughts, opinions, and views contained in this show, all material, has been conceived and approved by my co-host and the executive producer of this show, aka the K9 who prefers to remain anonymous. If Joe Biden gets elected president, there are some things that freelancers need to keep our eyes on, like his support for the PRO Act and his deep-rooted love for union. Now, as a freelancer, you're probably thinking, why do I need to be focused on Joe Biden's support for unions or for union legislation? Well, just think about it. When someone says union, what comes to mind? The first thing I think about is employees and employers. And guess what? That's what Joe Biden thinks about too. He envisions a United States where the middle class is heavily unionized. And that vision, his plan to achieve that vision, has led him to express some intentions and support for decisions that could be detrimental to freelancers.
I make no apologies. I am a union man. Period.
Oh boy. Joe Biden carries himself like he has a profound respect for middle-class employees. He credits middle-class workers with building America and keeping it running. But when he gives that credit to middle-class workers, it's not granted equally. He's talking about a certain category of workers, those in unions. Listen to the former vice president tell you work didn't build the middle class, unions built the middle class.
And the only reason we have a middle class is unions, not labor, unions. Organized labor, unions. You're the reason why we're going to rebuild the middle class. It's been decimated.
So you see, the middle class is not here because of labor. It wasn't the work of the farmers, the fishermen, the entrepreneurs. Although we're constantly told small business is the backbone of our economy, nope, not according to Joe Biden. The middle class, the country we have, it's all thanks to unions.
Organized labor, unions.
Biden explains how American workers fought for the right to develop unions. They won that right, they organized their unions, and those unions improved Americans' lives. Oh, and of course, to sweeten the history lesson, he makes sure to underscore that unions have been a pathway for women and people of color to enter the middle class. Because of course, you know, every story is better when you toss in women, children, or colored folks. In fact, according to Biden's website, quote, everything that defines what it means to live a good life is because workers organized unions and fought for labor protections. And do you know what he lists as a good life? 4 things: the 40-hour work week, paid leave, healthcare protection, and a voice in your workplace. Bosses and benefits. That's all you, the middle class people, need for a good life. Joe Biden claims he adores this middle class working life so much, although it's not the one he lives now, because that's his story. Joe Biden is constantly talking about his time growing up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and in Delaware, living in a working class family, and all of the lessons that his dad taught him about work and work ethic. Listen, this is the type of thing that Joe Biden constantly talks about.
You know, my dad used to have an expression. He said, Joey, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck, about your dignity. It's about respect.
Now, there's nothing wrong with someone's upbringing being the foundation for who he is and for what he supports. That's probably the best way for it to be. And there's nothing wrong with supporting unions and giving them credit where it's due. The problem is that the days of little Joey trailing along behind his dad are gone. Long gone. Biden is 77 years old, and he's talking about restoring life back to the greatness that he saw as a child in the 1940s or 50s. I mean, think about it. The 1940s, as of this year, over half of the people in America are aged 39 or less. How much of the population do you think is interested in taking life back to what it was when Biden was a kid? His antique vision of the world fails to realize that for a whole lot of people, a company carving 40 hours out of your week, telling you when you have to work, and giving you a week or 2 off when they approve it, that's not the good life. That's just what people have to work with right now, so they go along with it. But a lot of those people, if they could abandon that lifestyle today, they would, in a heartbeat.
You do the job because the job has to be done. Capiche?
People's desires and aspirations have changed. Employment has changed. This past year, 36% of the U.S. workforce freelanced. The number of people that are seeking independence from traditional jobs has been growing year after year after year. The working class is not limited to people who put on a uniform, pack a lunch pail, and go clock in someplace. I mean, how many YouTubers, bloggers, podcasters, animators, app developers, tech startups, how many of these do we have? One of the major problems with our politicians is that they come up with these ideas of what a good life is for us. Then they start making policies to support their vision of what's good for us. Now, Joe Biden believes what's best is more unions and more union workers. So he supports things like the PRO Act, which passed the House in February. And it's been hanging out in the Senate ever since, where hopefully it'll die, get stolen, evaporate, because the PRO Act goes beyond focusing on union rights. The PRO Act goes into defining who is an independent contractor. If it's passed, the PRO Act would make the ABC test a federal standard for determining who's a freelancer and who's misclassified as a freelancer and therefore should be considered an employee. If you're not up on the ABC rule, the first and foremost thing that you need to know is that it's devastating for freelancers. California started using it this year as part of a freelance law known as AB 5. If you haven't been keeping up with that story, you can head over to nogoodwords.com later and catch up. But for now, let me give you a little background on AB 5 and the ABC rule. The ABC rule basically says that a person is presumed to be an employee unless a company can prove 3 things. A, that the person is free from the company's control and direction. B, that the freelancer performs work outside of the company's normal course of business. And C, that the person is regularly engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business that's similar to the work that they're being hired to do. That means that freelance clients can hire you for a task, but they can't tell you when and how to do it. And the task they hire you for can't be part of their normal course of business. Oh, and by the way, you can only be hired as a freelancer if you can show that the work you'll be doing is work that you generally do. That basically you have a established business or an established history in that work. If those three things aren't the case, then basically you aren't a freelancer and you need to be hired as an employee. And that's what was supposed to happen in California. Companies that hired freelancers were suddenly supposed to hire them as employees and give them real jobs. But what actually happened was massive numbers of people lost their work and they lost their income. One example is Vox Media. Now, AB 5 took effect in January 2020. A month before that, Vox Media fired 200 freelancers that had been working with SB Nation. In case you didn't know, SB Nation is a sports news website, and it had relied on freelance writers for its content. But since their primary business and a writer's primary business is the same thing, those writers could only write a limited number of articles for SB Nation before they needed to be hired as employees. And the only reason that they could write that limited number was because of an exemption that was written into the law. So instead of dealing with all of that nonsense, Vox Media just stopped working with California freelancers altogether. And that's not an isolated case. The International Women's Forum did a Chasing Work campaign, which focused on how workplace regulations actually affect women. One interview they did was with a lady named Nancy. She was an independent contractor optometrist. So for 18 years, Nancy was working as an optometrist on a freelance basis, raising her 2 children. After AB 5 became law, she said it cut her income by 30% overnight. Then there was an interview with Jennifer. She's a writer and a yoga instructor. She said contract work accounted for 3/4 of her income. But thanks to AB 5, she started losing her clients who chose to work with freelancers out of state. The International Women's Forum concluded that policies like AB 5 are, quote, harmful workplace regulations. What they found was workers lost contract, reliable income, and recurring work, all based on the definition of what it meant to be a freelancer. And this was not just in 1 or 2 fields. AB 5 affected truck drivers, translators, theater crews, photographers, a wide range of people. In many of those fields, just like in Jennifer's case, California freelancers became like pariahs. No one wanted to work with them. Even now, when you look through freelance ads, a lot of them make clear that California freelancers need not apply because companies do not want to deal with the headache of these senseless regulations. AB 5 has been a nightmare. It's been a straight up catastrophe. It's caused protests. It's prompted lawsuits. In just those few months since the law has been enacted, over 100 exemptions needed to be granted. And writers and photographers were just recently added to that list of exemptions. California is still trying to mop up this mess, which is why during this November 3rd election season, California voters will be voting on Proposition 22, which is a proposal to repeal AB 5 altogether. But guess what? Joe Biden is opposed to Proposition 22. He wants AB 5 to remain in place. And he not only supports the ABC test, but he wants to take it further than California did. According to his website, as president, Biden will, quote, work with Congress to establish a federal standard modeled on the ABC test for all labor, employment, and tax laws. And Biden wants to crack down on companies that are misclassifying workers. And I mean crack down hard. His administration will, quote, aggressively pursue employers who cheat their taxes by intentionally misclassifying employees as independent contractors. He's vowed that he will enact legislation that makes worker misclassification a substantive violation of law under all federal labor, employment, and tax laws, with additional penalties beyond those that are imposed for other violations. And he wants a, quote, aggressive, all hands on deck enforcement effort that will dramatically reduce worker misclassification. By all hands on deck, do you know what that means? Well, he says he wants federal and state agencies to work together to catch violators. And he said he'll fund a dramatic increase in regulators for a large anti-misclassification effort. Now, I know you might doubt what I'm saying. You may think Biden's not going that hard on freelancers, independent contracting. Listen to what he has to say about it.
As president, I'll fight to pass the PRO Act and crack down on employers who try to block unions, and go further by holding executives accountable for labor law violations, including jail time if they're prominently involved in breaking the law.
Oh, and don't forget this.
Ban right-to-work laws and stop employers from misclassifying workers as contractors to avoid paying benefits.
And within his first 100 days, Biden vowed to form a working group that will deliver a plan to dramatically increase union density.
Everyone, could I please have your attention? Close your laptops, put any electronic devices away. I need your attention. Eyes to the front, please.
Listen, folks, Joe Biden is not presenting this as a pet project, as it would be nice to get this done during my administration. He's laying this out as a priority. And if you aren't reading between the lines, essentially, Joe Biden wants to convert more people into employees so there are more employees to pay into unions. Now, granted, there is a blip and a blurb here and there from Joe Biden about expanding protections for independent contractors and enabling them to also collectively bargain.
Give independent contractors and gig workers the right to organize.
But that is clearly not the spirit or priority of Joe Biden's plan. I can't interpret his plans any other way than to consider him pro-employment. And I definitely don't consider him freelance friendly. It's in his interest to see more people forced across the line from being self-employed to being employees, because he wants to see more money going into unions. According to Biden, he says employee funding is where unions get their strength, and he wants to see more people paying into those unions. Now, if that's attractive to workers, that's their deal. And it's great for them to have him on their side pushing for better representation for the money that they're spending. But those workers may even be interested to know that Biden isn't just pushing for the right to unionize. He's pushing rules and regulations that make it harder for people to have the choice to join a union if it's offered at their job. And I'm not sure about anyone else, but I'm not in favor of the government adding any more bills to my budget. I can decide how I want to spend my own money. But that's an employee conversation for another day. Right now, we need to be focused on what Joe Biden's plan means for us, for freelancers. And Joe Biden says that the ABC test will mean that more workers will get the legal protections and benefits that they should rightly receive. And that's because they will be converted into employees. The ABC test, to be clear, means that the number of freelancers and the number of opportunities to be a freelancer will go down, at least for those people based in the United States, if this becomes a federal law. Now, as I said earlier, politicians have this tendency to want to offer solutions to problems we aren't asking them to solve. They want to sell the idea that their plans for us are going to make our lives better. But as freelancers, we need to know when to know better. And this is one of those occasions. Biden claims that unions and traditional employment are a blessing for women. But the International Women's Forum does not share that view. nor do they share his views on the greatness of the PRO Act and the ABC test. The International Women's Forum says, quote, flexibility is a driving force for women in the gig economy. According to a 2018 survey, flexibility is important to 94% of working women, and 61% of these women prefer to have an independent relationship with their chosen companies versus working for that company as an employee. That's right, they prefer to have independent relationships. Not they're being forced to, not they're being taken advantage of by being misclassified. It's a preference. And the International Women's Forum adds that independent contract work is not just a choice for some women. It's a necessity. Now, while Biden is considering mopping us with this PRO Act, the ABC rule, this misclassification crackdown task force, the Department of Labor is considering updating the Fair Labor Standards Act to adopt what's called the Economic Reality Test, or the IRS test. Now, this is another way to determine who's an independent contractor and who's not. And this is much more freelancer friendly. And that's not just coming from me. The Department of Labor, as is considering these changes, had an open comment period. And not only did a lot of freelancers express support for the economic reality test, but they also used that opportunity to let the government know they are not in support of any ABC rule or any type of effort to turn them into employees. But just in case you don't understand the gravity, the risk that freelancers face if the ABC rule or anything like AB5 or Joe Biden's plan goes into effect, I'm going to read a couple of the comments that were submitted to the Department of Labor. I've shortened some of them for brevity. One of them is from Erica Chikowski. She's a Florida-based freelance journalist and marketing writer. And she says in a typical year, she has 8 to 15 different clients. And sometimes she also hires other writers, copy editors, graphic designers, creatives to help her complete her project. She says, I don't need or want to work as an employee for any of my clients. I make far more money offering my services on a freelance basis than I ever would as a 9-to-5 employee. I pay my taxes, fund my retirement accounts, and buy a decent HSA health plan each year. My work is project-based, I have complete control over my schedule, and the flexibility and freedom that the independent contractor relationship provides me is incredibly important. I'm the mother of 2 small children, and the freedom I have to work from home and spend time with them is one of the big reasons I love the freelance life. At the same time, I'm no moonlighter. I am the main breadwinner for my family. My work is lucrative enough that my husband can opt to be with the kids as a stay-at-home dad, again, to provide the best upbringing and care we can for our children. I have watched with horror at the proceedings to push forward the ABC test in the AB5 law in California. If that kind of rule was rolled out nationally, it would harm my family a great deal. Developed several generations ago in an age before the internet or telecommuting were even in the realm of possibility, this test is not made for the realities of modern work. Being forced into an employment relationship with my clients would create conflict of interest nightmares, as I frequently work with competing publications and competing technology companies over the course of a year. Additionally, it would limit my ability to write off my home office and other expenses the way I can on my Schedule C. It would limit my ability to utilize tax advantage retirement accounts the way I can as a self-employed person. Even part-time relationships would give my employers the ability to dictate my schedule and mode of work. I'd lose the flexibility I need as a working mother. Finally, that lack of flexibility would bring no benefit with it. An employer would not be required to provide me with health insurance or other benefits, and I'd likely be forced into a corporate health care plan that is probably inferior to the one I buy on the open marketplace. We need labor laws that protect people like me to work when we want to work, the way we want to work. Now, let's go to Debbie Kaplan. She describes herself as a work-at-home mom who provides writing service. She says, I am writing in support of the Department of Labor's proposed economic reality test to be used in classifying work status. As we've seen in the pandemic, flexibility is everything. I value my independent contractor status as it gives me the freedom to work when I want, for whom I want, and on my own terms. Laws like California's AB 5 and proposed federal laws like the PRO Act and the Senate's Worker Flexibility and Small Business Protection Act use the ABC test. And the laws purport to provide protections to those who do not have employee status, presuming that they are disadvantaged, underpaid, and exploited. I beg to differ. These bills would kill my career and limit my earning opportunities and growth. As a writer negotiating my own rates, I earn an effective rate of $100 to $200 an hour, and I am my own boss. If I were to be paid hourly as a W-2 employee, even part-time, my earnings would be much lower, and the only advantage would be the company would pay half of what is now my self-employment tax. I often have at least 25 clients per year. For some, I write one article a year. For others, I write dozens. If I were to hold a W-2 part-time job, I would not have the benefits promised to me, and the legal classification would actually work against me. How? Well, as a part-time employee, I'm usually not eligible for company retirement plans. I can't use that W-2 money to contribute to my own SEP IRA, which is a self-employment IRA, or individual 401k plan as I do now. I can currently contribute up to $57,000 to my individual 401k or SEP IRA. I can only use that W-2 money to contribute $6,000 to an IRA. How does that help me save for retirement? As a writer, retaining copyright is an important benefit of my work. I create something, I keep the copyright. As an employee, the copyright belongs to the employer. I lose that valuable right with employment. Employers also enforce do not compete clauses, telling me that I can't work with a competitor, which limits my ability to earn a living. As we've seen with AB 5 in California, companies do not hire freelancers to be part-time workers. They will either hire a handful of people and leave the rest behind, or they will look elsewhere, including outside of California, or in the case of a federal bill, abroad. My clients hire me because they need my expertise for specific assignments, but they don't necessarily need me on a regular basis. They won't be saddled with the administrative work to get me onboarded for what could be a one-time project. AB 5 in California harmed hundreds of professions due to the rigid ABC test. The ABC test does not belong in state or federal legislation. It was passed in the 1930s for factory workers, a huge change from how America now works. Some freelancers are so fearful about Joe Biden pushing forward the PRO Act that it is the determining factor in how they vote. Kim Cavan, a freelance writer and co-founder of Fight for Freelancers New Jersey, which is a Facebook group, told CNBC, "My vote is 100% on this issue because we are talking about 100% of my income." And Rafael Espinal, he's the executive director of the Freelancers Union. He says members of the Freelancers Union are largely Democratic. But even with that, those that are aware of the negative impacts of AB 5 in California are extremely concerned about what the next presidency could mean for their industry. The Freelancers Union is taking this subject so seriously that they have already started contacting legislators about the devastating effects that the PRO Act could have on freelancers. And they've held a town hall with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to help alleviate some of people's concerns. Now, Chuck Schumer is committed to working with the Freelancers Union so that we don't see the same outcome at the federal level that we've seen in California, according to a CNBC article. But that is a pre-election promise by a person who's not even running for president. So you might think that this conversation is about your vote, but it's not. It's about your money. I'm not here to tell you how to vote, how you should have voted, or anything about voting. I'm here to tell you freelancers and freelancing organizations are worried, and they have reason to be.
Please be alarmed. Do not remain calm.
Do not sleep on this. For freelancers, the stakes are high when it comes to the PRO Act and legislation like it or anything like AB 5, especially if you have Democrats take control of the Senate and Joe Biden gets elected. Joe Biden talks a good game. He talks like he's for the middle class. He talks like he's for the working class. He talks about being a president for everybody. But don't most politicians talk a good game when it's time to get elected? This is the type of person that Joe Biden wants us to believe he is. This is the Joe Biden that we seem to be working with right now.
Does your president understand at all what you're going through, what so many other people are going through? Question is, does he see you where you are and where you want to be? Does he care? Has he tried to walk in your shoes to understand what's going on in your life? Or does he just ignore you and all the folks all over America who are in a similar situation?
Those are some very good questions. Do you understand what we're going through? Are you willing to meet us where we are? That's what we would like to know from Joe Biden. Now, CNBC said it reached out to the Biden campaign to get clarity on Biden's position regarding AB 5 and the PRO Act. And the campaign did not even dignify the request with a response.
Hello?
If we expect things to turn out in our favor, we better keep an eye on what's going on. And we better make our voices heard when things don't look like they're going in our direction. You feel me? Well, till next time, folks, I'm going to leave it there. As I've said before, we won't tell you what to think, but we will tell you what to think about. If you have thoughts or comments, you can go to nogoodwords.com. That's KNOWGOODWORDS, nogoodwords.com. You can find the post for this episode and you can get busy in the comments doing your thing. And if you're feeling this podcast, please subscribe. The podcast is available on 9 platforms, and any support that you show via PayPal or Cash App, I would like to say now, is greatly appreciated.
Fall in love with low prices, all in the Kroger app. Get fresh seasonal produce, lean, juicy meats, and all the best prices on all your grocery needs. We have deals on everything from fish in the seafood department to meat and cheese at the deli. Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away. Or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details.